GrowCFO is where finance leaders grow together. Join thousands of like-minded professionals using GrowCFO to access the combined knowledge and experience of the finance leader community. You can join us today, growcfo.net. Hello and welcome to the GrowCFO show. My guest this week is, as we record, fresh out of a massive fundraise. Vineta Bajaj is the Group CFO at Rohlik Group. Vineta, welcome to the GrowCFO show.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me and having me. I really appreciate it.
Vineta, tell me something about you.
Oh God, where do I begin? So I'm Irish, very important. I did an accounting degree. I trained in KPMG as an accountant. I also trained and did my tax exams as well. I then worked in Kerry Group, a large PLC that's in nearly every country in the world. It's about 7 billion revenue. I then moved to the UK and worked for a company called Ocado Group and spent 10 years there, where the business grew from a FTSE 250 to a FTSE 50 at the time. And I held a variety of roles around being initially a group financial reporting person. So that classic coming out of a big four into that classic group reporting role. And then I led the financial control team. I built the tax team. I built the treasury team. And then I was part of a number of strategic decisions. So I held a variety of finance director roles. Through that time, I had a number of accomplishments, M&A, Fundraise, and supported a fundraise of over 1.5 billion. I had some very key strategic initiatives like internationalizing the business from a UK only retailer to a large logistics provider in many countries. I then left and took a group CFO role in a company called Rohlik Group. I left for a few reasons. One, I really wanted the number one role. Having done nearly everything in finance, I was quite passionate to grow to be a CFO or grow CFO. Nice plug.
Thank you for that one.
Terrible. It's terrible. I'm terrible. It's the Irish humor. But I was quite passionate. Like I really wanted to be a CFO. It was something that quite internal in me. I'm very ambitious. So I looked around and I found this company called Rohlik Group. And Rohlik are effectively online grocery in Europe. So think Ocado.com, which is the online retailer part of Ocado, but that's Rohlik. So Rohlik do online grocery in 5 countries in Europe. We make over 800 million revenue. We hire thousands of people. We have automated warehouses. And the difference is we do same day grocery delivery. When I mean same day, I'm not talking my top-up shop. I'm talking my 60 euro to 100 euro plus basket. So my weekly shop or my twice a week shop is what we do. We are a unicorn. We're a Series D business. And our largest investors are Index Ventures, a number of family offices. And to what you mentioned, we just successfully completed a fund last week where we raised 170 million fresh capital into the business to allow us to grow more, which is really good news for a consumer, online, and then grocery business in 2024.
It certainly is. And you hear about a difficult market for just about everyone at the moment. Growth rates everywhere, very low. Grocery business, cutthroat, big discounters in the market. Everybody wants to do the online thing, yet you've come up with a fundraise like that. Tell me more.
Yeah, I mentioned that I always wanted to be a CFO, and I wanted to be, like, I spent 10 years, or probably less than 10 years, as the number two, being the kind of the person who prompts the answers. And I always wanted to be the main act. I always wanted to be in the hot seats. And so firstly, being able to do that myself as a group CFO was firstly quite daunting personally, because when you do something new yourself, it's okay, can I actually ask the questions? So it's been quite, I suppose, personally, a fantastic accomplishment in my first group CFO role for me personally. And that's been a tick. But you talk about growth rates. My business, Rohlik Group, we've grown 40% year on year, and we've reduced our cash burn significantly. So I think there is a challenge around supply chain, cost of living, and that's impacting like many countries in the world right now. But it's about how you look at your finances and how you direct your resources effectively to make sure you're doing two things: growing sustainably and reducing burn to then ultimately become cash positive. And we're doing just that. And I'm really proud that it's something that I've personally accomplished in the business since I joined, which has been really satisfying personally. But when you talk about Fundraise, we met a lot of investors and appetites are mixed. You're right. The money isn't flowing that much in the market. And there are many people who say, oh, online grocery. No, that was so COVID time, and there have been a lot of VC and PE firms who have been burned. But I find that the market sentiment is opening out more, because if you find a sustainable business that's great. Like, I mean, one key point about our business, which is very different, which is why I was able to, it was a good fundraise for us, is we will be cash positive as a group in less than 12 months. So we weren't that business that said, hey, I'm running out of money, or I've got 5 months cash runway. It's, we've got a fantastic, healthy business and we want to do more. And what do you think? And that's not really heard of in the market these days. So I think I'm quite fortunate to be part of a fantastic business where the story is quite easy to sell, to be honest.
Yeah. So what did you personally find as the biggest challenge in this fundraise?
Because this is a finance podcast, I'll give you an insight into how I was preparing. So I told you I wanted to be in the hot seat. I was like, okay, so I'm the person now who needs to know every number. And it's hard because you take that pressure, like I personally took that pressure pretty much to heart. So my natural instinct is to learn everything off, right? So I was home over a weekend and I basically got like the last 5 years of every key metric in the business before I joined, after I joined. And I was like, I need to learn all this off. I need to know what my productivity was, what the basket was, what my growth rate was in 21, 22, in March 22 to March 24. Like I was like, I completely swatted the whole thing. It was like an exam. And I said like half Saturday and I was doing this and I was like, is this the right answer? Because I got myself all knotted up and that's normal actually. And I don't think people normalize the internal struggle that especially when you're first in your first CFO role, or you're the person who owns the purse, who's supposed to know the numbers, how the CFO in the background prepares. And that's why I really want to share that. So I was like, I learned all these numbers. And then I was like, I've worked for some fantastic CFOs and I don't think they've done this. So I must be doing something wrong because you're growing into the role. But when you're number one, you don't have a boss to ask. You have to figure it out yourself. So I had to like really step back going, Benita, I think you're being a bit of a madman here. I don't think any other self-respecting CFO who's probably in larger listed businesses are probably doing what you're doing right now. There must be a better way. So I stepped back and what I did was I put myself in the investor seat. And I was like, well, I've got my presentation. If I was the investor, what would I ask? And then I came up with every question that I would ask. And then I prepared for those because I could talk about a business for days. For some reason in my head, I was like, God, I'm the numbers person, so I should know every number.
Yeah. And I suppose there's that panic that, oh, what if somebody asked me that number? I don't know it. I'm not going to look very good, am I? Preparing yourself for probably 100 questions you're never going to be asked.
Well, exactly. And I had to go through that personal cycle because I think if I didn't do that, I wouldn't have gone into our first meeting ready, if that makes sense. And I think it's really important to talk about that. So what I did was, well, I went through that journey, but I thought about exactly what you said, which was if they ask me a question, I don't know, but the answer is, I know the answer. If it's 35% and the answer is 35.2%, I can talk about it, but I can say between 34 and 36% because actually the immateriality of 1% isn't actually a lot when you're talking about the future rather than the past. And so that's where I kind of like, actually, Vineta, calm down. You don't need to know every number.
That's very true across a whole load of the business that we look after. Now, we were brought up as accountants and auditors where we had to reconcile every last penny in every general ledger account. Precision was the rule, but actually, when you're doing a lot of things, and I'm thinking about putting growth forecasts together, costings of products and so on, it doesn't matter about having the exact number. I say to people, we've just done a revenue segmentation best practice accelerator in GrowCFO, where one of the things I got people to do is say, well, you're not just segmenting your revenue, you need to know the margin and the growth rates on these. And a lot of questions came back that said, Kevin, we just don't have the numbers. Well, if you're calculating margin, it doesn't really matter whether it's 15%, 15.5%, or 16%. It's of that ballpark. Will it make any difference to the decision that you take? And it's the decision you've got to think about.
And I think that's the challenge about thinking about being internal CFO and external CFO. What I mean by that is internally, I know my internal budget. I know the range. I know what's material, what's not. But when you're talking to different prospective investors, you don't know their appetite on how much detail and even precision they would like. So therefore, you just don't know what questions you'll get. But actually, somebody really wise once said to me, who's not a CFO, said to me, there comes a point in your career where you don't need to be the best accountant in the room. It's about how you present the idea and the concept that's more impactful. And that really rings true, especially when you're trying to fundraise.
Yeah. And if there's a really tough question, you don't necessarily have to have the answer straight away. You can always say, oh, we'll get back to you on that.
Yeah, and look, I did that a few times, right? Because that's okay. Actually, I don't have that number to hand. It's around this, but we can follow up afterwards. And that's okay. And I think it's just, like I said, going into it first time in the hot seat, you don't know how to prepare because you don't know how people you have watched prepare because they probably don't share that. I don't know how my old CFOs used to do it. And that's why it's quite true when people say it's lonely at the top because you don't know what or how you should prepare, which is why I want to share that particular story, that it's okay to have a little kind of mini panic going, I need to learn every number and then go actually step back. But the answer comes down to broadly understanding the trends, broadly understanding the key input metrics, and broadly understanding the story you're trying to sell is sufficient because you'll probably, especially through a fundraise, you will have follow-up detail meetings. So the initial meetings are me and my CEO together. And then there's follow-up financial meetings where we go through a financial plan in detail. And that's different because then you have the Excel file in front of you and you're like, yeah, well, that's because of this. And that's a different conversation with different audience.
And I guess you give them a data room as well. It's got all the details sitting in it. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you completed pretty big fundraise. It's a mixture of debt and equity.
Correct.
Anything that you wish you'd done different across that process?
Oh, it's a good question. I think I would have brought some of my team in earlier, actually. Mm-hmm. So with a fundraise, you have lots of meetings that potentially go well, some that go well and then they pull out, etc. And trying to find the balance of when to bring your team in, knowing that they already have a day job, they're still trying to do month end or year end or the forecast or whatever. And you don't really want them, I don't want to say wasting their time, but there's a lot of effort and lots of calls that often go nowhere. And I was extra protective personally to make sure that the teams were focused on the right key investors towards the end. And as a result, I brought them in later. And because I brought them in later, it meant that I held a lot of the work. Now, I also still have a day job too. Yes. So I think my learning personally would have been actually leveraging the team slightly more, which is definitely a learning from my perspective. It's a tricky one, especially as we mentioned at the beginning, current environment is challenging. So to fundraise, I couldn't create a dedicated team. So I was leveraging my existing team because we don't know how fast or how slow it's going to go, which is why I was very protective of their time.
Now, a few months ago, we ran a best practice accelerator in GrowCFO that was all about preparing for a fundraise. So we've covered our practical part of some of what we talked about in that accelerator here. But one question that I got back from one or two of the people that were part of that accelerator was, okay, so you tell me, Kevin, it's never too early to start working out who your investors might be. How do you go about identifying and selecting investors? What did you do to identify the right investors? So
it's a mix, and it depends on the size of the business. For us, especially the size that we are, we have an external financial advisor. And most larger businesses, because we're definitely on the larger side, have an external advisor. And so it's about identifying those that, firstly, are interested in your industry. Two, are either understand the industry or can bring value to the business in some way or the other, whether that's through industry experience or through people who can sit on your board. And three, investors in your markets as well. If I was to go get an investor in a market who doesn't know me, that would be great because they might bring lots of experience, but they might know the market that I'm in. So what you find is that investors in certain markets will always want to invest in brands in that market. With our financial advisor that we use, our external advisor, we identify from that perspective. The other thing is we're a late stage business. So we're going to definitely do some form of an IPO exit in the future. When you're at this stage of business, you often think about who are the investors who will stay with you long term to that. So for example, some late stage companies will look at financial institutions because those financial institutions will hold when you go public as well. So you find a balance of that type of investor when you're trying to select an investor.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
But ultimately, there are many specialists around that will allow you and point you to the right people. It wasn't me going through my Rolodex, as it were. It was
you were schmoozing with these investors a long time before you decided the fundraise was going to be a real thing. It was, okay, we're doing this fundraise. Who should we be talking to?
Yes, but we started talking to investors we had met before. So people that we had met in the previous fundraise that I was in there for, it was hey, look, it's been a while. Love to give you an update in the business.
Yep.
And so that's an easier way to access people who know your business, who know what the pitch was before, and therefore you're giving them an update than anything else, which is easier. And then a balance of some newer potential investors, as I said, based on the state that we're at. But that's how we approached this.
Yeah. So, Vineta, you've talked about some really impressive growth, a really successful fundraise, but we did say that you're in a difficult market. So there must be organizations in your market that are having a tough time of things at the moment.
For sure. We actually acquired a business last year, I say a competitor, but another online grocery business in Germany. And they were actually larger than our local markets. So we acquired them. We actually absorbed the entire brand and we did an entire integration. Since that, in our industry, so online grocery, what you'll see the trend is that there's a lot of consolidation happening. So we as a business have now been positioned not only as a success story, always a success story, might I add, but a consolidator in the industry. And as a result, there are many businesses that are struggling not only with burn, but also with cash burn, but also with demand with customers, because customers are now more cost conscious because of cost of living challenging in many markets. So with less kind of demand and higher cash burn, depending on the industry, what happens is we see a number of businesses who are running short of their cash runway. And as a result, as a consolidator in the market, I get a number of calls, and our business gets a number of calls regularly asking us to do short-term interim due diligence on businesses that might go under in a matter of weeks. And it's quite interesting, actually, because as a finance person, on one hand, actually, as a human, my first reaction is, well, I want to help. What's going on? But actually, you have to step back and take the emotion completely out of it. This is numbers. I am a sustainable business. Does this business strategically make sense to me? What's the business cash burn? What's the potential growth and vertical that they can add to my business? If I'm buying a business, you're buying a legal entity, and that has, I don't know, historic audits or tax audits or not, or potential litigation. So how do you do a due diligence on I'm not going to say distressed business, but a business very quickly? And you have to take a very black and white and non-emotional approach to it, which I'm quite good at, might I add. I'm like, well, is it worth me buying you? Yes, no. What do you bring to me? Do you add value to me? Can I tell the story in 5 years' time and go, this is why I bought the business, not because out of the good of my heart, because ultimately my business is doing very well because we're not a charity. Oh, no. So we regularly get calls and do some short due diligence, but it's a hard market out there because consumer choices and preferences have changed and the fundraising environment is hard. And those two things together mean that businesses that are running pretty tight puts them in awkward situations. And I really feel for them. And I'm really glad that we're not there.
Yeah. And when you are potentially buying assets from a distressed business, or even get the offer of taking a business in, it puts you into a restructuring position. Now, I guess that emotional detachment that you just mentioned has to be important when that comes into play.
Yeah, I'm definitely way more emotionally detached than I think a lot of people. I've had other friends who have had to restructure businesses and, they've been quite emotional about it. They're going, oh my God, these people mightn't have jobs and it's my decision. I'm like, so you're a number. Yeah. So this box will go from red to black. That's good. Because ultimately my responsibility for Rohlik, or even at my role as Group CFO in whatever business I'm in, is making sure that I have going concern, I have cash runway, I'm able to pay my bills, and I'm not taking on more fat because I'm not a charity. And as a result, it's a case of, well, it's the nature of the business. I'm only restructuring or considering restructuring because somebody else made a decision and a bad mistake and overbloated the business. I'm actually rectifying it. But I think ultimately a CFO needs to look at this very black and white. You are responsible for the cash. The bank is your KPI in obviously growth and P&L metrics, but ultimately, especially in the current economic environment, it's cash. And so you need to make sure you're comfortable with who you aren't restructuring. And ultimately, that's your KPI. And that's how you stick to it. And it's unfortunate, but that's just the environment that we live in right now.
But at the same time, you strike me as quite a people person.
I am, right? I love my team. I love people. I love learning people. But I think it's about flicking a switch. Unfortunate, but ultimately, I can't remember the name of the philosophical question, but it's if you're on a tram and there's someone that might get hit by the tram, if you derail the tram, you either kill everybody or you kill I think it was a pregnant lady, or you kill the pregnant lady and you just kill her and her kid. What do you do? It's the same thing with business. I want to make sure that it's terribly, but it's actually a philosophical question. But for me, I want my business to survive. Yeah. And therefore, as a result, I make difficult decisions. That's okay. It's just business. And I think to be able to sleep well at night, being able to appreciate that's the job, that's okay. And doesn't mean it doesn't impact you emotionally, but that emotion part should not impact your decision making because it's just numbers.
Yeah. And just winding back to what you said before, you're effectively perhaps not making a decision as much as correcting somebody else's previous bad decision.
For sure.
Yeah. If you've got 100 people being affected by that previous bad decision, and by putting it, you're helping 90 of them to the expense of 10 of them.
Absolutely.
Not a bad place to be.
And let's just think about it. And then a brand exists, customers still get their groceries. So ultimately it's about longevity. It's about, so there's more things at play than just restructuring people's jobs. It's making sure the business and the customers can still get their groceries or get their products or whatever it might be.
Vineta, you've got a load of experience through that career. You must be burning to share that with other finance leaders.
Yeah, you're right. I do. And I do often, actually. So I guess a couple of years ago, I started investing in some small businesses and also advising some businesses. So I actively look for interesting businesses where I can help add value. And the size ends up being maybe pre-seed to Series B, that kind of size. I actively look for female founders where I can. Business first, female, well, it's female founders first and business next, but it depends on the sector that I look at. And as a result of that, I mentor as part of the Judge Business School at Cambridge as well as actually sit on the International Advisory Board for my own university in Limerick in Ireland. So that way I can pass on that knowledge to people so that people can learn it instead of learning through, I don't know, through failures or success like me.
Yeah. It's interesting you say you're attracted to businesses that have women as their founders.
Oh, for sure.
Interviewing on a previous podcast, David B. Horn, who wrote the book Funded Female Founders, told me all about the unconscious biases and the disadvantage that women are at in fundraising and running business. Is that something that's dear to your heart?
It is dear to my heart because I've experienced sexism, racism, and ageism because I'm quite young for where I am. I'm 37. I'm fine. I owe my age. It's not a weird thing. But I'm 37. I'm very young for where I'm at, and therefore I've experienced ageism. I've definitely had some sexism, and then in some areas some racism, right? Because I'm an ethnic minority too. And then you add the Irish accent, and then I don't fit into any box. It was quite entertaining. And for me, just an example of some things I've experienced. I had a meeting where my voice was gone. It was years ago. I had tonsillitis. My voice was gone. So I was on antibiotics. And I was in this meeting with my boss and my voice was lower and it was tough fear because I was very ill. And he said to me, because I'm hearing you, you sound like somebody different. And because you sound like deeper, I feel like I'm listening to your voice more and I'm listening to what you're saying more. Literally, that's what he said to me. Quite interesting, right? And He didn't mean it the way it came out. And I'm super chill. That doesn't offend me. I attach emotion to things I care about and I don't really care. But it was a very interesting intellectual insight as to what he said without realizing what he said. That's just a short clip of, I hear women who want to talk lower or more bassier in their voice so men hear them better. And I'm like, man, be yourself. You've got to own your space. So I'm quite passionate because we closed this fundraise a couple of years ago. We had a big kind of kickoff dinner and there was like 18 people in the room and we had a really big dinner. And I sat there, I realized a few things. One, I was the only female in the room. Two, and also I'm married and childless. Everyone married and child, I guess. And they were all minimum 15 years older than me, all like 48 plus. And they all said it's super posh English. Didn't help. And there are two scenarios of women. I have women who come to me and they go, God, like you feel like, how do you feel in that room? And I'm like, well, there's a negative and a positive side. One is, oh, I'm the only female in the room, or I'm the only female in the room. Literally, you own your space. If I'm the only female in the room, of my background, I bring diversity of thought. I bring a different perspective to every single person in that room. They're all white as well. And therefore, my opinion is different. So everyone is broadly going to agree with each other, but I will have a different perspective from my background, from my experience, from my heritage, from my age. And I can either be, oh no, I'm the only person here, or I'm the only person here, so I have a superpower. And because I have that, my voice matters and I will make it matter. And I'm quite passionate about making sure that female founders, women aspiring to be a CFO, whether you're female, whether you're an ethnic minority, whether you're even a man, making sure you know that's your power and drive that. If you own that, you can do anything. I have never approached any job in my life going, oh, but they'll think I'm female or they'll look at this. I'm like, I don't care. If they have a glass ceiling, I will find a different place that doesn't have one. And that's fine. because they can live in that world. They don't deserve me. So it's very much an internal power. And I try and impart that onto as many people as possible, because I've done it and I don't think about, oh no, I was female or I was ethnic minority or I was Irish. I'm like, I sound different, I look different, and I am intelligent. And therefore I'm going to add value to this meeting, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, love that. Love that.
I'm quite passionate about this.
Yeah, one of my favorite personal development gurus, a chap called Michael Hipple. And in Michael's book, How to Be Brilliant, he's got a whole chapter on reframing stuff. And there's about 2 pages worth of list where it's, I can't do this because I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm from the wrong ethnicity, I'm too old, I'm too young, I'm too fat, I'm too thin. And the message on every single one of those is just what you said. Reframe it from negative to positive and own the space.
And the way I've always likened it to people is, if you go out to a bar with some friends, and if you have a bunch of mates and there's, I don't know, there's 5 guys and you're the only female there, right? Because maybe 2 of their girlfriends cancelled, I don't know. Are you going to say, oh no, I'm like the only female here in the bar with a bunch of my mates? Or are you going to go, sweet, cool, we're out for a drink? And you have to take that kind of mindset to any meeting. I'm like, why are you cool with that? But you're sitting there having an element of imposter syndrome or whatever you're feeling internally. Just own that power and just go in and kick ass, because you're the only cheerleader you're going to have.
Vineta, thank you hugely for being this week's guest on the GrowCFO show. I think
Thanks for having me.
Great place to leave the conversation with that powerful message. Own your space.
Thanks, Kevin.